Good day, everyone. Today, we'll walk through how to configure GitHub OIDC to authenticate with an AWS account. First, we need to configure the AWS account. Go to IAM and navigate to Identity Providers. Click Add Provider. Select OpenID Connect as the provider type. For the provider URL, enter https://token.actions githubusercontent.com. For the audience, enter sts.amazonaws.com. This establishes trust between AWS and GitHub's OIDC provider. Next, go to the Roles section in IAM. Click Create Role, and grant this role the permissions required for your workload. In the trust policy, set the federated principal to the ARN of the identity provider you just created. Under condition, configure token.aud as sts.amazonaws.com, token.sub as the GitHub repository where your code resides. This ensures that only workflows from the specified GitHub repository can assume this role. After completing the AWS configuration, we can move on to GitHub Actions. In this example, we create a new GitHub branch for testing. Inside the repository, make sure the folder structure includes .github/workflows. Then create a new YAML file inside this directory. This file defines the name of the GitHub action workflow, the branch on which it should run, for example, the newly created branch, the jobs and steps that the workflow will execute. In this example, we want to test whether the AWS credentials configured via OIDC can successfully authenticate and access the target AWS account. The OIDC configuration in GitHub Actions consists of two key parts. First, under permissions, we must configure ID token, right? This is required because GitHub must generate a unique OIDC JWT token for the workflow run. That token will then be used to assume the IAM role in AWS. Second, we use the aws-actions /configure-aws-credentials action. These lines of code exchange the GitHub-issued JWT token, assume the IAM role created in AWS, configure temporary AWS credentials for the workflow. As a final step, the workflow attempts to list S3 buckets. This serves as a validation step to confirm that authentication and role assumption were successful. Now let's push the code to GitHub. Go to the Actions tab in the repository. You will see the workflow triggered by the recent push. Open the workflow to observe each step being executed. Finally, expand the step labeled Test AWS Credential. If the workflow successfully lists the S3 buckets in the AWS account, it confirms that GitHub Actions has successfully authenticated with AWS using OIDC. At this point, we have established secure, token-based authentication between GitHub and AWS without using long-lived access keys. That concludes today's session. If you found this video helpful, Please leave a comment, like, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.